but we are big on football banter whenever we get a chance. And Trevor's in to do a little we in, we out. You fired up about this? Like your first we in, we out? Like you did. Did you do buy, sell, or hold with Brian yesterday?
I did.
All right. So I mean, it's not a whole lot different, but we have the subscriber submitted we in, we out questions. And let me see, I might have to go one more so I can see him here. Pretty good up here on the screen. Oop, actually, I was scrolled all the way to the bottom of the page. Here we go. This is kind of, this is we'll just see. From Polly 1029. We in, we out. The coaching staff will continue this class without adding a quarterback and or quarterback in the upcoming portal season. What do you think about that? In or out on that, Trevor?
I'm probably out on that because, especially with everything that just went down with Deuce Night, and I know we're going to be talking about that for weeks to come, but odds are, based on the makeup of the quarterback room at some point, if I were a betting man, somebody else is going to transfer out just based on the makeup of the quarterback room.
Mm-hmm.
I think Notre Dame is going to go and find some depth piece in some capacity. I don't know if it's going to be bring in another transfer portal quarterback in the hopes that that person is going to start, but just something to add a depth piece, especially depending on who and how the quarterback battle is looking going into 2025.
Yeah, I'm out on it as well. I think that they obviously you're behind the eight ball a little bit because you have you've got about 2 months now until, well, I guess a little bit more than 2 months until the winter signing period, right at about 2 months until the portal opens. I think that they're going to do everything they can to try to add as much quality as they can in this 25 recruiting class to make up for the loss of Deuce Knight. So and then, what happens with the portal, I think is going to depend on, as I think somebody said, maybe who transfers out. They would obviously like to have at least 3 scholarship quarterbacks next year. So that'll be their minimum, goal. So I think that I think that they will do everything they can again to add another quarterback in this 25 class. And then, like what happens with the transfer portal, I think is going to be really interesting because, maybe you could get like an FCS level quarterback to come to Notre Dame. But I think if that happens, your sell is essentially, look, you're most likely going to be a backup quarterback, so how much does someone just want to be a part of Notre Dame? How much would a graduate degree from Notre Dame factor into that? All those different kind of things most guys want to play. It just gets a little bit trickier when you're talking transfer portal because I think we're all pretty confident that the starting quarterback next year is going to be one of the other 3 guys in the room, that's behind Riley Leonard right now next year.
Yeah, I agree. The transfer portal conversation starts to get a little tricky, especially when it's just for depth purposes. Because,
yes,
to your point, Sean, most people enter the transfer portal are going to want to go somewhere else and start. So
exactly. Now, like in the case with UNLV, like the whole thing that happened out there, they actually got 2 guys who transferred in last year, not just the guy from Holy Cross, but they both competed for a job in that case, and obviously one of them won the job. But again, that would not be the case here at Notre Dame. I don't think they're going to be telling, whatever transfer, hey, you're going to come in and you're going to compete for this, because I think that they're pretty confident with what they've got in the room right now. Joe wants to know if Rizak will be displaced or included in the 105. I think that as of right now, there would be, again, it's going to depend on, do all 3 of the guys who are behind Leonard right now stick around for next year? But if one of those guys leaves, I think that it gives Rizak a really good chance to, to stay around and be included in that 105 next year.
Sure.
Again, it's going to be it's going to be a lot different with how you have to manage the rosters when you've got 105 guys who now all have to get some form of scholarship. You can give them partial, the guys above, like the first 85 have to get full scholarships, and those extra 20 you can give partial scholarships. But how exactly they go about divvying those out, considering you will no longer have pure walk-ons, it's just gonna look a lot different than what we've been used to seeing.
Sure.
So from Bergier, I say that right, 23. Will Mike Denbrock help Marcus Freeman hold coaches accountable after the season? Do we think Denbrock will help push Freeman to dump dead weight? Chansi Stuckey was easy, but a Rudolph or Gino or Washington might be a tough sell job. Feel like with Golden and Denbrock, they will not hold back their opinions. So, are you in or out on this, Trevor?
This one's interesting.
Yes, I know.
This one's really interesting, Bergier. Will he help hold coaches accountable? I would assume so, but I genuinely think the makeup of the coaching staff is a lot of self-accountability. I think a lot of that job is going to be on Freeman. I understand where you're coming from with this because Denbrock and Al Golden have more experience as a coach, just in comparison to Freeman. Al Golden has head coaching experience, so I get where you're coming from, but I don't know how much of a say Al Golden or Mike Denbrock are going to have in terms of who stays on the staff overall. I think that's more of a communal conversation.
Well, yeah. I mean, the coordinators and the head coach are always going to be part of the evaluation process of the position coaches that come lower on the ladder. So I'm sure those conversations are going to take place every year. There's always going to be some kind of evaluation, whether formal or informal, and like behind closed doors that I'm sure, like that's probably something as a young head, because I get kind of the gist of what Bergier is saying. You do still have a young head coach, and you've got two coordinators, one with head coaching experience himself, and the other, who's been around. They both of those guys have been around for three plus decades, basically. So I'm sure that Marcus Freeman is always going to want the input of their coordinators about how they feel about the guys working underneath them. But in terms of like holding accountable, like everyone's assuming that they're guys who've got to be pushed out the door right now, and
Right.
I would not agree with that statement right now. We've got some other questions that'll kind of involve some of the other assistant coaches, so we can we can hold off and just wait for it then. Here's a little bit less meaty one from Domer Grizz. Bye weeks are boring, in or out?
So before I started working with Irish Breakdown, this was definitely a we in. Now that I'm kind of on the other side of the desk, I got to be honest, I'm kind of out on this one, only because it's nice to sit back and I can talk about Notre Dame football, and there's not this impending stress that I know that's going to come up on Saturday. So
especially when you're doing the post-game show every week.
Right. So I will say bye weeks in general are boring because at the end of the day, I'm always going to err on the side of I love watching Notre Dame play. Now, how I watch games are slightly different than how it was before. So I don't know if there's a hold on we in, we out, but overall I'll still say in.
I'm generally in. It is boring because every week you're on that hamster wheel, and it's like we're already 5 weeks into the season, which is amazing to me. Consider, like I said to Vince early in the season, I think, you wait forever for that first game, and the next thing you know, it's week 3, and now here we are after 5 games going into a bye week. It is nice to kind of be able to catch your breath a little bit. Like when you look at this weekend slate of games, there's not much meat there in terms of what's really interesting. So sometimes it's nice to just be bored and lay around on the couch, and like you said, not have to worry about that level of stress that that comes with whatever happens in that game. From John O'Shea 003, in or out, must move Jaylen Sneed and Preston Zinter to Viper. What do you think about that one, Trevor?
I'm out on this one with Josh Burnham coming back off of injury. Junior Tuialamaka starting to come into his own and play better than what he was last year. I see where you're coming from with Sneed moving down, but in those sort of NASCAR pass rushing packages, Sneed came in and rushed off of the nickel, not so much lining up on the line of scrimmage as vyper. I do think it would be interesting to see Preston Zinter a little bit in that vyper role, just due to his size a little bit. But overall, I would say out, just because I think there is a little bit more depth there than what I think is alluded to. But the injuries are tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say must. Like you said, I do think that Jaylen Sneed can continue to contribute from a pass rush situation, and maybe you see him more. So I don't think that he has to necessarily move to vyper to do that. Zinter is the interesting one, just because they do need to find some depth at that position. Like you talked about, Josh Burnham and Bryce Young is kind of in that mix as well. Vince and I were talking a little bit about it yesterday. Like, you get a little bit more overall athleticism, I think, right now, and the ability to move with a guy like Bryce Young to potentially be able to help out at that position as well. So, I mean, they've still got some nice pieces there, but they do have to find depth. That is one thing that they are going to have to solve. But I wouldn't say they must move those guys. Right. I think that they can be part of the mix, but I don't think they're must moves by any means at this point. Red Salmon Ghost. We in, we out. Guerby Lambert starts at left tackle against Stanford, then starts every game for the next 3 years.
I'm going to be out on that, and it's not for a lack of wanting to see that happen. I just think that would, especially at the tail end, starting every game for the next 3 years. I mean, I don't want to be this guy, but who knows what happens on the injury bug, especially with what we've seen this year. I would love to say I was in on that, just because of what I know Guerby's ceiling is and how big he is. But Anthony Knapp, believe it or not, he actually graded out at his highest grade against Louisville.
Right.
So
yep.
I do think that it would be tough to yank a kid after having their best performance against the highest ranked opponent Notre Dame's played so far this year. So I think for those reasons, I'm out on it.
Yeah. And even if Guerby did find his way into the starting lineup this week, I have the bigger issue with starting every game for the next 3 years, because Emil Wagner's been playing really well over on the right tackle side, and Charles Jagasaw is going to have something to say next year when he comes back from the injury. There's going to be a completely different set of battles going on. I mean, really, you're going to see them across the board when you look at the fact that everybody playing right now has multiple years of eligibility left, and the fact that you've got number 2 guys out there playing, so I think that there's just going to be big battles just across the board. And like I said, Charles Jagasaw is going to have something to say about whether or not Guerby or anyone else finds himself in the lineup next season.
Yeah, 100%.
DJ, we in, we out. Georgia loses to Tennessee and Texas, finishing 9-3, and they're not in Atlanta on championship weekend.
This one's interesting. I think just for the sake of how much fun it would how much fun it would be to watch this happen, I'm going to say that I'm in on this. Tennessee has the firepower and offense to do it, and I do think Texas is a pretty complete team, in my opinion, especially after watching what they did to Michigan. Now, Michigan, as we've seen, does not really have much of an offense short of a decent running game. So, but I would say that I'm in on that. My prediction for the SEC championship game was Texas and Alabama, regardless. And Tennessee has came in and they played much better than I thought that they were going to this year too. So
I'm going to be out just because I do think that they will definitely, well, I won't say definitely. I do think they will beat one of those 2 teams, but I would be out on them beating both of those teams. I like Texas quite a bit between the 2. And look, Tennessee has also impressed me quite a bit to start this season. They are better than I thought they were going to be. They've just been firing on all cylinders, but I'm not going to write Georgia off just yet because they had really a crazy first half And then at least defensively, they were able to respond in the second half, and offensively, they were able to respond in the second half. So they might still be out, in Atlanta, just because it's the SEC and you do have Texas as part of that mix now. But I'm going to say they split with Texas and Tennessee. I don't think they'll beat both of them. Joe Allen, in or out, there will be 0 teams undefeated by the time the playoffs roll around.
I'm in on that. A lot of teams have yet to play the bulk of their schedule. Got a little bit of a taste of it last week with Alabama playing Georgia, but Ohio State still has some tough teams to play yet. They still have to play Oregon. They still have Michigan yet to play, which is always a rivalry game. And based on what's happened the last couple of years, you never know what's really going to happen there. Alabama still has to play. Alabama still has to play LSU. They still have to play Tennessee. So there's a good amount of games that I think teams will be on upset alert. So, yeah, I'd be in on that.
Yeah, I'm leaning in as well. Like I did, look at a couple of schedules. Ohio State, Oregon is the one everyone's talking about. Will one of those two end up being unbeaten? Like whoever wins that game end up being unbeaten? Because, now I do think Ohio State, just based on what we've seen so far, is better than Michigan this year.
Yeah.
But, we're talking, more than a month and a half off at this point. But I will go in because it just feels like not quite complete parity, but when you've added all these different schools to these conferences, I think it's a lot tougher for anyone to be able to run the table now than it was last year. Scott wants to know if you knew that Brian put him in timeout on the post-game show because he wrote "Free Trevor."
Yeah, Scott, I saw you put that in the post-game chat. That one made me laugh. I did not know that you were putting the timeout for it.
From Ballpeen Shillelagh, this season, 3 of the 4 power conferences have a conference champion who's never won the conference before. In or out on that?
Well, let's see. 3 of the 4. I mean,
if Texas wins the SEC, that's one.
Yeah. If Oregon wins the Big Ten, that's another. I don't know if they beat Ohio State, but that could be another one. Right now in contention for the ACC, you have Clemson again. You have Louisville's up there. Miami's up there.
Yep.
And then the 4th one would be the
Big 12. I need to look and see what's the Big 12 looking like right now. BYU is at the top right now, and they're looking pretty good. BYU and surprisingly Colorado.
Yeah.
Right behind them. Now, little trickery. Colorado has won the Big 12 before, even though they're new, like back in the Big 12 right now. So
I'm probably going to be out on this one, I think, just after going through it, because I don't think Oregon is going to win the Big Ten. And I think that they're one of the only addition to the Big Ten that could give Ohio State a run for their money.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think USC has it in them.
I still like Ohio State right now in the Big Ten.
Too. Yeah. I like Ohio State in the Big Ten right now. Contention for the SEC is, Alabama, Texas. I would still put Georgia in there because, to your point, Sean, you can never count out Georgia, so I'm with you. Tennessee looks like they're really good. Ole Miss, after they lost to Kentucky's probably moved their way out of contention. I'm out just because 3 of the 4 is a good amount.
I'm with you. I'm right there. I would say 2 of 4, but 3 of 4 I would have to be out on.
Yeah.
Because even BYU's the undefeated team in the Big 12 right now, but there are a lot of teams in that conference that still have just one loss. So I think that there's a lot to be played there. So even Utah licking their wounds a little bit from their first loss, I think that they're still going to be in the mix by the time it's all said and done. Wouldn't that be something if BYU and Utah in their first season in the Big 12 end up playing for the Big 12 championship?
Yeah.
Play it out in Vegas. Okay, from Double Bogey Like a Champion. in or out, Jonathan Taylor masked the coaching flaws of Joe Rudolph.
See, I don't know. I don't know enough about Joe Rudolph prior to him coming to Notre Dame. I know that he was at Wisconsin for a while.
Yeah.
It's tough, right? Because there's so much conversation around, sometimes a running back is only as good as his offensive line, or sometimes running back skilled players can make their offensive line look better. I'm
going to say
out.
this. I realize it's fashionable and it's very easy to bash Joe Rudolph right now, but Vince and I talked quite a bit about this yesterday. 4 of the 5 positions on the offensive line, you have starters who were number 2 on the depth chart in fall train, like not even in fall training camp, coming into this, with the exception of Anthony Knapp coming into the season. Knapp was obviously, like he was floating around trying to figure out who he even was when training camp started. And, Emil Wagner is a first-time starter as well. So I can't make drastic judgments on anything related to Joe Rudolph right now, based on the fact that you have so many guys who are, starting right now who weren't supposed to be the starters. Brent says he has a surplus of talent. I mean, there's talent, but you're looking at star ratings as well. Like look at Jaylen Sneed as an example. Like Jaylen Sneed has a star rating, and no one would be talking about whether or not Jaylen Sneed is seeing more playing time if he didn't come in with a 5-star rating. So you can say that he's got a surplus of talent, but it's all very, still for the most part, very young, very raw talent. And just looking at the Jonathan Taylor thing itself, I mean, the fact that Taylor basically, he had 2 2,000-yard seasons, and for the course of his 3 seasons at Wisconsin, he averaged 2,000 yards a year. I'm sorry, but you don't just do that yourself. You don't just go out and roll out of bed and have 2,000-yard seasons. Joe Rudolph had, I think it's like between 12 and 16 Wisconsin offensive linemen who were playing, who are at least drafted by NFL teams. Whether or not they're still playing, that's another question. But there was a lot of talent on those Wisconsin offensive lines as well. It wasn't just Jonathan Taylor. So,
agreed.
Again, like even if Charles Jagasaw had not gotten hurt and was the starter, and everyone, like if you had no injuries, there would still be some fluctuation in how this line plays this year, because you would have had new starters across the board, really, with the exception of Billy Schrauth. And even Schrauth only started 4 games last year at the end of the season, after the Spindler injury. So, there was always going to be, some kind of breaking in period for this offensive line. And then when you had ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom in succession, all those injuries, I can't form a full judgment of Joe Rudolph based off that.
I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. And another thing too, Joe Rudolph was not only at Wisconsin for when Jonathan Taylor was there. I just looked, Joe Rudolph was at Wisconsin for 7 years.
Right.
And I don't think he was really bad up until Jonathan Taylor got there, and then was really good when Jonathan Taylor was there. And then when he left, he was really bad. So when you are an associate head coach and an offensive line coach at Wisconsin, a pretty notable Big Ten school, I don't think you're that bad. I think injuries play a part in it for sure. But I think it's too early in his tenure for me to have that strong of an opinion of Joe Rudolph, because he has only been here for 2 years. So we'll see how it plays out long run, but injuries play a part. It's easy to go through and kind of nitpick, this player didn't pan out or this player didn't pan out. But I mean, thinking over the course, Rudolph has had to coach through some injuries. And the development of Ashton Craig has been pretty good. He was playing well before he got hurt. Billy Schrauth is starting to come into his own. So we'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
Okay, so a few different comments, questions here. Jeff says, would Harry Hiestand be doing more with this injured line? Maybe, but Harry Hiestand is like the gold standard. So if you're going to compare everyone to Harry Hiestand, they're always going to fall short of that. And even, again, like given this hand, maybe they'd be moderately better or more consistent, but I don't think that they would be head and shoulders better than what we've seen right now. Because again, you've got a true freshman starting on one side who's not a true tackle either. Like he doesn't have anywhere near the physical size that Joe Alt had when he became a starter midway through his freshman year. And then you've got an undersized guy who has worked to get his frame up to close to 300 pounds, Emil Wagner on the other side. And again, just when guys start getting their knees rolled, it's like there's only so much you can do to have the number two guys, and then to get them to go out there, because the offensive line is different than any other position on the field. It's not just you doing your job. It's 5 guys who have to work in unison to do their job. And so when you're mixing in subs, there's going to be issues no matter who the offensive line coach is.
I agree. Harry Heatstand being the offensive line coach wouldn't prevent Charles Jagasaw or Ashton Craig from having season-ending injuries. I don't know how much that would hold true.
Yeah. So Scott says Rudolph gets an incomplete still for now, but he's been cynical. He could do the job at an elite level since day one and more skeptical now. Ask yourself, has Knapp improved in 5 games? Pendleton. The answer to Knapp is actually yes. Trevor said it. Like the Louisville game is his best game of the season. And I can pull up his PFF numbers here in just a second, just to kind of give you some data, on what the Louisville game said about Anthony Knapp. His total grade for the Louisville game was 73.5. His previous best game was 62.6 against Northern Illinois. His other 3 games, 2 in the 40s and 1 in the 50s. Pass block grade, he almost doubled. Well, he really did. Like his pass block grade was 65.3. His previous best, also against Northern Illinois, 59.9. But otherwise, he had a 22, a 33, and a 25.3. And then his run block grade against Louisville, 72.7. And he had been pretty much hitting 50s and 60s prior to that. So just across the board, again, there's grain of salt and all that. I'm just giving you, like, whether you put numbers to it or not, just your eyeball test watching him in the Louisville game, it was obvious that he had his best game so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
DK said, the question is on run blocking. I compared Rudolph versus Heastand's numbers for the 9 years Harry was in college, and Joe's numbers were higher for yards per game. Interesting.
Yeah, I think, I hear where you're coming from with this one, DK. I think there's a little bit of context that needs to be provided with this one, just because Wisconsin was such a run-heavy offense that was their sole way of moving the football, essentially. Notre Dame's offense under Harry Heatstand was slightly more balanced than that, so I hear you.
Everyone's fired up about the offensive line. Here we go. BCND. Oh, he was agreeing. He says that Joe Rudolph is the Van Gorder, the Brian Van Gorder to Marcus Freeman, as Van Gorder was to Brian Kelly. Again, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I'm out on that one. Brian Van Gorder was really bad.
Yeah. Was last year's line awful? Like, was it just god awful? No. Were there some areas where they could have been better? Sure. But I can't go that far. Can't go that far at all. Another one from Red Salmon Ghost. If, God forbid, Riley Leonard gets banged up and can't play for a game or two, Kenny Minchey would be the best temporary replacement because his game most replicates Leonard's style of play to compensate for the porous pass blocking of the offensive line. In or out on that one, Trevor?
I'm in on the fact that Kenny Minchey would be the best temporary replacement based on somebody being able to replicate Riley Leonard's play style. The only reason why I say I'm out on that is trends for the coaching staff show that it would most likely be Steve Angeli. Now, my opinions are slightly different than what I believe the coaching staffs would be. I think if Riley Leonard is out for an extended period of time, meaning more than just he can't complete a game, I think you start to look at number 8 or number 12, because that's going to start building for the future. But
I agree.
I am in on the fact that you said that Kenny Minshew would be the best because he would replicate Leonard's style of play. But ultimately, I'm out because I think that the coaching staff would make the decision to put in Angeli.
And that's exactly what I think. Yes, I do think that Minchie, if you're trying to run the same style of offense and based on, things that we've seen with pass blocking and stuff like that, which again is incrementally at least a little bit better, than it was. We'll see how that, if that trend continues. But yeah, I mean, just style for style, Minchie, because of his mobility, would give you more. He would, have some escapability and all that kind of stuff. But I agree with what you're saying. Based on everything that we have seen and heard, I think that the coaching staff sticks with Angeli, and then you're essentially just trying to run a different kind of offense at that point.
Yeah, I agree.
From Stubbs, Notre Dame will finally figure out that play action passes are still legal in college football. They're allowed to run the ball and use play action to help control teams crashing the line of scrimmage. In or out on that, Trevor?
I'm in on that. I firmly believe Mike Denbrock is one of the best minds in college football. And I think that is a glaring area where he has not utilized the strength of Notre Dame's offense to its potential. You got to find a way to get Riley Leonard into a rhythm. Play action is a quarterback's best friend, especially when you're as run heavy of an offense as Notre Dame is right now. So I'm in on that one.
Yeah, it makes sense. It is a little more than baffling that they haven't done it more than what they have, because of what you said. It's like they want to be such a run heavy team that's essentially what they are. The fact that they haven't done more of that, they need to get to more of that, though. I think it could definitely help them be more successful, especially when you do have some of the issues that we're talking about. ND Forever 72. In or out, Notre Dame runs the table on the remaining schedule and gets in the playoffs barely.
I'm in on the first part. I'm out on the second part. If Notre Dame runs the table, they won't barely get in. If Notre Dame goes 11-1 with thinking about this playing out the rest of the season, if Texas A&M continues to play well, Louisville continues to be who we think that they are, and USC, barring a total collapse, will be ranked when Notre Dame plays them. Notre Dame will have 3 ranked wins in the top 25. 2 of those are on the road. At 11-1, I think that they're looking at potentially a 7-9 seed. I don't know about barely getting in. So definitely in on running the table. I'm out on the making the playoffs barely. Yeah,
barely is the key word. As Joe says, if they run the table, they won't barely get in. Because now granted, there's a difference between the AP and the coaches poll and the playoff rankings. They won't be that far off, though. They're sitting at 13 and 14 in the 2 human polls right now. So if they run the table, they will probably, they should end up somewhere in the top 10, whether it's 7, 8, or 9. They'll be in the conversation. They'll be back in the conversation to be hosting one of those first round playoff games, because remember, what is it? You've got 8 teams. So if you're 5, 6, 7, or 8, one of those teams, the seeds, you're going to get to host. So Notre Dame will find itself back in that picture if they're able to run the table the rest of the way. And I do think that they will end up running the table the rest of the way, because, well, there's more improvement than some people see. Let's just put it that way.
Agreed.
ND Forever 72 again. Notre Dame will have the same coaching staff they currently have in 2025. No one forced out or leaves on their own for another gig. In or out?
I'm out on that. I'm going to be interested to see, and not because I want to be out on it. Let me preface that. I like Notre Dame's coaching staff as a whole. I'm out on it with how good Al Golden has been as a defensive coordinator. I believe he just got signed to an extension. I'm not sure, but I could see a lot of teams headhunting for him. Mike Mickens is next in line to have a full-on defensive coordinator role. I don't know how long he stays around, so who knows? But I'm out because it's so hard anymore to keep entire coaching staffs
I mean,
together.
we've already seen turnover in each of the first 2 years. And as USMA 87 said, Washington could leave for a head coach or a DC job. I mean, he obviously did interview at his alma mater last year for the head coaching job. And when your team has success, people come looking at your assistant coaches, and that's what's happened so far. So I would be shocked if they keep this entire staff intact next season.
I agree.
Double bogey like a champion. Part of the negativity surrounding this year's team is even when winning, it hasn't been that fun to watch. Are you in or out on that?
Are you sorry? So is it double bogey is asking just if
so he's basically saying even though they're winning most of their games, it's just not that much fun to watch when they are winning.
So I'm out on it because I do think that there is negativity around winning. I don't think it's because it's not fun to watch. I think it's because the expectation is not what we thought it was going to be, not because I had a lot of fun watching the Texas A&M game. Mind you, it could have been, it was night before the wedding and I was just in good spirits anyways. But I don't know if it's because it hasn't been that fun. I mean, I have a lot of fun watching Notre Dame beat a Big Ten team on the road by 59 points. It could just be me, but I think I agree with the first part in there is negativity even when the team is winning, but I think it's just because it's not up to the expectations that we all thought.
You hit the nail on the head with the E word, expectations, and that's exactly what it is. The expectations for this team coming into the season were to run to table, get to the playoff, and host a playoff game. Now, those last two things are still on the table. Running the table is not, and I think that what's really made things not fun to watch is the fact that you lost at home to Northern Illinois, and obviously that was not a fun game to watch. But like I had fun watching Texas A&M. I actually had fun, I had fun watching the Louisville game last week. Even though there were obviously stretches where like the fumbles were the craziest thing, but like I kept saying when I was watching it, it's like a million things have happened and it's only the first quarter still. Like to me that's enjoyable, but I don't watch, I guess, with the same level of expectation as a lot of fans watch with, so it kind of lets me enjoy that. Like so many fans, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but so many fans like hold this expectation up like everything is supposed to be perfect. I mean, there were people complaining about 66-7. Like if you're going to complain about that, how can anything ever be enjoyable to watch?
100%. I mean, every game is not going to be like Alabama versus Georgia, right? Like there's just going to be some games where there's, a lot of action happening. Sean, to your point, a lot of stuff happened in the first quarter of the Notre Dame game. And then, sometimes there's a lull in the action in the fourth quarter. I think it picked up. So I don't, every game is not going to be some crazy high intense shootout. It just won't.
Yeah, Joe said, how has it been a roller coaster? We led the entire Purdue game and led the Louisville game the final 50 minutes. Well, I mean, if you're talking about roller coaster for the season and whatever else, and some ups and downs and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it was, again, like the only thing ugly about the Louisville game was just the fact that you had so many turnovers going, and like when you, and I completely get it. It's like when you fumble the opening kickoff, like that gives everyone a pit in their stomach the rest of the way. It's like, oh boy, here we go. And I really thought that was just going to be a bad omen for Notre Dame after all the turnovers that affected last year's game against Louisville. But as I said earlier this week, like I think that I came away anyway much more impressed with the fact that that they were able to put that behind them and focus on what they needed to focus on and went about winning a football game. They scored touchdowns the first 3 times the offense actually got to touch the ball, and they scored points in 4 of their 6 first half possessions,
Yep.
so
And
all
drove
things
down the
considered,
field. Drove down the field in the fourth quarter when they needed to.
when they needed to. That's right. Elmer Layden, the biggest threat for Notre Dame on the remaining schedule is either Army or Navy.
I'm out on that one just because I don't think that they are the biggest. I think they are one of the bigger threats on Notre Dame's schedule in comparison to Virginia. But I still think the biggest threat's going to be USC in the Coliseum. Rivalry game. It's the final game of the season. So depending on how that one finishes out, that's Notre Dame's last game of the regular season, no matter what. So, but I agree, they are one of the bigger threats for Notre Dame on the schedule, especially with how they are with their run defense right now. So I definitely get where you're coming from, but I don't think they are the biggest.
Yeah, they won't be pushovers, but let's look at who they played so far, for like being American Conference teams and who they've played and all that kind of stuff. They've done just fine. Again, they're not going to be pushover teams, but I think that USC is going to be the much bigger threat when it's all said and done than either one of the Service Academy teams. And that looks like that is that for we in, we out. I think that is it.
All right.
Boom. So with that, are you ready for rapid fire, Trevor?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it then. So give me one bold prediction for Notre Dame this season.
You got it. Bold prediction. I think Riley Leonard is going to have over 3,400 total yards of offense to himself by the end of the year. So I broke it down. Right now, he's on pace to have 1,800 passing yards. And if rushing stays the same, he's on pace to have about 898. I think Notre Dame's passing game is a lot closer than what some people might think that it is. And it's slowly starting to get there. I think if they can focus on getting receivers more focused on yards after the catch and letting their playmakers go be playmakers, that's going to make the stat sheet look a little better for Riley Leonard. So I think his passing game average goes up over these next 7 games, and I have him at 3,400 total yards of offense to close out the year.
3,400 total yards. I like that. That would be a pretty solid season for a quarterback. And the touchdown numbers are going to end up looking pretty good there as well. Mine also has to do with Riley Leonard, but I've got somebody else combined in there with him. My bold prediction is that both of those guys are going to be right around 1,000 rushing yards at the end of the season. You talked about the pace that they're on. So for them to get there, they would have to perform over that pace the rest of the way. But I think just the way this offense is built and the fact that they have a bye week this week, they play 3 games, and then they get another bye week. I think that's going to be key for a guy like Riley Leonard to be able to rest up and to continue to be able to play that style of football the entire way. So I think when all is said and done, Riley Leonard is going to have a career high rushing year, and his previous career high was just under 700 yards at Duke a couple of years ago. And I think that he and Jeremiah Love are both going to be threatening the 1,000-yard mark on the ground this season.
I like that.
I like how we both had a Riley Leonard related in there.
Yeah.
Like it had to be bold. If I guess it had to be Riley Leonard if it was going to be bold, right?
Had to.
Okay, so we're going to do, I've got a list of the position coaches for Notre Dame. We're going to go underrated, overrated, or properly rated for each of them. I'm curious to see how the chat fires up here when we talk about each of them to see what they think as well. But we'll start with the running back coach, Dylan McCullough. Is he underrated, overrated, properly rated?
Okay, so let me ask you this real quick before we dive in here.
Okay.
Are we talking over like to us as fans or how like nationally they are viewed as coaches?
Ooh. I think it is more like here.
Okay.
In the fan base, because I think that nationally, I don't think these guys are nearly as well known as like what the fan base thinks of them.
Fair enough. So if we're going just on the fan base, I think Dylan McCullough, I think that he is properly rated. I think he is one of the position coaches at Notre Dame that has a lot of respect amongst the fan base, especially given what he's done with what he did with Estime and with Diggs and what he did with Estime last year, what he's doing with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, and what he's been doing developing some of the younger guys as well. I think he's properly rated amongst the fan base.
That's how I put him as well. You know, it would be hard, I think, to underrate him, but because of everything that he has done since coming in the door, not just developing these guys and getting them to play, you know, like the standard that he holds these guys to. If you look nationally, I think he's probably vastly underrated. Now that might, like, in terms of a media, like a national media standpoint, if you were just going the coaching profession, because he does have that connection to Kansas City and all that stuff, and you know he's probably going to blow up here again pretty soon, because you know I know he's got a book coming out. Sarah Spain, who used to be at ESPN, worked on a book with him, and I think it's supposed to be coming out maybe this winter or next spring or something like that. So I'm sure he's going to have a lot of attention coming back on him as well. But I think for right now, in these circles, he is properly rated, probably underrated on the national perspective, though. Yep. You can get, I guess you can probably give both if you want. Now, this next one is going to be a lightning rod. Defensive line coach Al Washington.
As far as the fan base is concerned, and I'm sure I'll probably catch some heat for this, hear me out on this one, guy. I think he's underrated based on what he has done with the defensive line this year. Gabriel Rubio's hurt. Boubacar Traore is now hurt. Jordan Botelho is hurt. And I think what he's been able to do to get some of those young guys ready, I think is something that can't be overlooked. I understand a lot of the gripe with how Riley Mills and Howard Cross have been playing to start the year, but I don't know if that's on coaching, because if I look at the defensive line room as a whole, what everybody always tells me is that when it's one or two players, it's on the players. When it's everybody, it's the coaching staff. So I don't know if it's just something internally that Mills and Howard Cross have to get worked out, because they had their best game of the season so far against Louisville. Hopefully that trend continues to move up. But Junior Tuialamak is playing at a higher level. Boubacar Traore was playing really well before he got injured. Jordan Botelho was having a bounce back year. Bryce Young and Logan Thomas were both ready to play when they were young. So I'm going to say underrated based on how the fans view him. Now, that is not me staking the claim that he's just one of the best defensive line coaches in the country.
Right. That's the key. But I think he's underrated as well, because like some of the things that you mentioned, before Jordan Botelho was injured, he was off to a career, he was en route to having a career year. And so he's injured. Boubacar Traore steps up, and look at what he's doing. You know, like, okay, like Decaf is saying RJ is bad. Well, he came from another system, and he's in what, year 5 coming over from Duke? Like, look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste, same type situation, same type body, you know, less experience even, and look at what he turned into. He got drafted, and he's playing in the NFL right now. Javonte Jean-Baptiste would not have been drafted and probably would not be in the NFL if he had stayed at Ohio State last year. The Mills and Cross thing is like, look, as much, you know, again, like your expectations for those guys, I think kind of sets the standard. And the fact that they are even here this deep into their career still says something about them, you know, and I don't mean that necessarily as a pejorative. I'm just saying, like, it's not that much different than Sam Hartman. Like, Sam Hartman ultimately had to stick around for a 6th year in college, because what was the other option for him? You know, and like Vince and I were talking about yesterday, kind of turned out that his ability to read defenses probably had as much to do with why he was still in college and you know, wasn't going to get drafted the year before, right, as anything. Like, there's like all of these guys that stick around that long, especially when they have produced, if they really felt like they could have, you know, started their NFL careers a year ago, they would have done so, but they decided to come back. Now, NIL factors into it and all those different things. But I guess my point is, like, Josh Burnham, Jordan Botelho, Boubacar Traore, all of those guys were really blossoming before their
Mhm.
injuries occurred. And
Mhm.
like, are there issues in the interior? Sure, but some of that also has to do with like guys just aren't ready to go.
Yeah.
Apparently, if they, like, because like someone was asking, DK was asking Sean Sevillano, and all these, I get it, Armel Mukum, like, you would want them to be showing you more at this point, but they're still relatively young interior defensive linemen, and some of them just aren't ready to go at that point
Mhm.
in their career. So, again, I'm not saying that Al Washington is like the best defensive line coach in the country,
Mhm.
but I am saying when you sit back and look at the production he was getting out of some of these young guys before their injuries, I do think that he is at least slightly underrated based on what most people think of him.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That and once you factor in that he's getting two freshmen ready to play in Logan and Bryce Young. I mean, that's Bryce Young was
Yeah,
not expected to have this kind of
Bryce Young,
workload.
another good one. Yeah, and
You know.
Logan, look at how both of those guys played last week.
Hmm.
And you mentioned Tui Alamaka. He's playing pretty well so far also. So, I mean, again, everyone wants to point the blame at a coach because a player's not ready, but sometimes it's on the player too. And and it's also, again, it's not like it has to be like you're to blame for this. Sometimes you're just not ready, whether it's physically, mentally, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes you're just not ready to go yet, and you need to continue to develop that. Again, that's part of why you have guys who stick around for 4 and 5 years and aren't drafted yet.
Yeah, and it's one of those that you can't with a coach like Al Washington. I understand that he's a very polarizing coach for fans to have opinions of, but it can't just be you can't just live on one side. So there is some validity to that comment. I agree with you, but it can't just be well, look at the guys that he didn't get ready. But it also can't be well, look at the guys he did get ready. It's you kind of have to take the in between. It's a little bit of the gray area, but that is why I think he's underrated in terms of how Notre Dame fans view him because I would make the argument that I think the majority of Notre Dame fans don't think very highly of Al Washington, and I think so far this year with the cards that he's been dealt with injuries, I think he's done a relatively decent job.
Yeah, again, it has been a little bit mixed, but there have been, the guys that we rattled off there who have developed and who were playing at a really high level before they were injured. And I think probably the biggest thing that impacts people's opinion of him is just the recruiting, because you do have to start getting some more, big hits with these guys. Not to mention bigger bodies, but they need a bigger hit rate with some higher rated guys to step in here and be able to compete. How about cornerbacks coach Mike Mickens?
I'm going to say he's properly rated as far as how Notre Dame fans view him because if you're anybody like me, I think extremely highly of Mike Mickens. Um, yeah, from a national perspective, I think that you could go he's underrated and not talked about as much to start getting defensive coordinator looks. But I look at what he's done with the development of Ben Morrison and the development of Christian Gray, and last game especially with what he was able to do because he's also like the defensive pass game coordinator. When Ben Morrison left the Louisville game, you had a true freshman in Leonard Moore starting the game because Christian Gray couldn't go. You move Jordan Clark to field side corner. You have Rod Hurd come in and play a little nickel slash safety, which he hasn't done a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
And they still performed really well. I'm really high on Mike Mickens. I agree, Brent. Mike Mickens is outstanding,
Yeah.
and for me, I think he is at the very least properly rated. And you could
It
make
may
the
be
argument.
even underrated,
Mhm.
just because, like, yeah, because every year, like when Benjamin Morrison had to, became a starter as a freshman, and look at the development of a guy like Cam Hart, who started off his career as a wide receiver, and then the guys you mentioned, the fact that they played a big chunk of last week's game without Christian Gray, Benjamin Morrison, and Jaden Mickey, who were going into last week the top 3 cornerbacks on the roster. And they played, excuse me, without you know, 2 of them for the entire game and without 3 of them for big chunks of the game. So I think for the most part, he's properly rated, but I still think you could go underrated. And, like you said earlier, this is a guy who is going to be sought after in terms of becoming a
Oh
defensive
yeah.
coordinator here pretty soon.
Oh yeah.
So going back to the defensive line, Steven was asking, curious our take on whether in principle you would want a nose tackle who eats blocks more than Cross and Heinisch. And I think he had another comment, or somebody else had a comment, or obviously you want bigger bodies than Cross and Heinisch playing that nose. It's not, to me, it's not quite as vital when you're playing with 4 defensive linemen as opposed to if you were playing with a 3-4, then you would obviously just want the most massive body you could have in there, that you could have if you're playing with that. But I think everyone would like to see someone who is at least 300 pounds, if not, in the 320-pound range as your minimum playing in there if possible.
I think I think the size depends on what you're asking them to do. So, Steven, I agree with if you are going to ask them to just eat and take on blocks to let linebackers scrape over top and run fit, I wouldn't mind seeing a bigger guy in there, which is why the injury to Gabriel Rubio might have been a little bit more impactful than what some of us might have thought at the start of the season. But I go back and think one of the best interior defensive linemen Notre Dame has had in the last decade was Sheldon Day. And Sheldon Day was 6'1", 285 when he was at Notre Dame. So he was not somebody that was that 6'3", 330-pound guy that you see, at some of those schools that you were mentioning in the chat, like the, Georgias, the Alabamas of the world. So I hear where you're coming from. I think it depends on what you're asking them to do.
Well,
right?
Sheldon Day, part of what made him so good, he had the high school wrestling background, and he was a state champion high school wrestler, and so he had that leverage and agility as well as the result of that really helped him out. So you could be a little bit more undersized doing what Sheldon Day was doing, but he had a different kind of explosiveness, different kind of agility in there as well.
I agree. It's just one of those things where it just all depends on what you're asking them to do. I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, they don't weigh enough, that's why they're not playing well.
Yeah.
I think it's what you're asking them to do. Howard Cross and Donnie Heinisch are 2 guys that are quick off the line of scrimmage and they're twitchy. And the strength of their game is not eating blocks from a 335-pound offensive guard, right? Because on the flip side of that coin, somebody that's been under scrutiny a lot this year has been Riley Mills, who is almost a 300. He's 6'5", 297. You have Jason Onye in there, who's another 6'5", 295-pound guy. So I get where you're coming from there, but I think there's a little bit more to it than just size, but a bigger defensive interior line is not, I'm never going to be opposed to it.
Joe Rudolph, underrated, overrated, properly rated. Before you answer, there is no correct answer on this one, Trevor.
Yeah, if we're going based on,
this is a no-win situation for us to answer this question at this point.
Yeah, I was about to say, based on how, what Notre Dame fans think, I think he's properly rated. Notre Dame fans don't think that highly of him. Now, I think that there are some extenuating circumstances this season, right? Because of the amount of injuries that are on the offensive line, with the season starting out with your starting bona fide left tackle getting injured for the entire season. So I'm going to go properly rated just on what his, I guess you could say, reputation is. You could even make the argument for underrated, but
see, I'm going to go properly just because there's no way that he's overrated.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's any way that he's underrated either, just based on the performance of the line. He's only been here for 2 years, and he obviously inherited 2 really good tackles last year. And there were some mixed results with what happened in the interior, but again, you had first-time starters out there who were kind of breaking in last year, and then just to go back to everything that we've talked about with this year's offensive line, it's I feel like a broken record at this point, but 4 of the 5 starters were number 2 on the depth chart at some point before they ended up becoming starters. And obviously 3 of them out there right now. Well, 4 of them, all 4 of them because of injuries or why. And, like how about the fact that Emil Wagner has played pretty good? Like, that's part of Joe Rudolph's evaluation too, right? A first-time starter who's playing really well over there at right. I'm not calling him an elite tackle by any means, but he's played really well, especially for a first-time starter this year. So I think Rudolph is properly rated. Like the better grade, as a couple of people have said, is probably incomplete. I really think it is incomplete because I do want to see him with, because like next year's line, no matter what, because of everyone who's had to play at different points this season, everyone's going to have a lot more experience next year. So I know nobody wants to wait a year before we have to make these judgments. And then, a lot of people think that we'll be having the same conversations over and over again. But, Jeff says we're digging in deep with it. I'm not defending him. I'm just saying, how can you properly judge a guy when 4 of the 5 guys on the line are not the starters that were supposed to be the starters when the season started? Like, how can you judge the guy based on that?
It's just too early. I mean, he was. You could make the argument that Joe Rudolph was helped out by inheriting a guy in Joe Alt who was already coming in, but it's just too early to say. Injuries make it really tough to gauge, and I think the line overall, it needs correcting. Sean and I are not saying that the offensive line is perfect, and there's no issue with the offensive line. There's a lot of things that need correcting. But for the cards that have been dealt, Riley Leonard's been sacked 5 times in 5 games. I mean, it's tough to say that Joe Rudolph is doing an abysmal job when the sample size is just too small. So I would agree it's either properly rated or just,
See, I don't get this one. He had one generational O-line that underperformed and one injured young line that's been bad. I mean, Joe Alt himself didn't underperform. He was the generation, like if you're, calling him a generational talent, and, Blake Fisher on the other side, like you had those 2 guys, and then, again, then you had Zeke Correll in the middle. There's a reason Zeke Correll left to go to NC State, and then you had 2 new starters at guard. So I don't really consider last year's line a generational line by any means. Like, you had a really good talent at left tackle and a pretty good talent at right tackle, but I wouldn't say generational.
Yeah, I agree. I'm with you.
Linebacker coach Max Bulla.
Underrated. I don't think enough people are talking about Max Bulla and the job that he's done so far. I mean, painting the picture, he took over as linebackers coach in February of this year after losing J.D. Bertrand, Maris Leafau. And so there was a lot of question marks. You were going to have a good amount of first-time starters in your linebacking core. And so far, and Brian and I talked about this in the 1 o'clock show, the linebackers have improved game over game over game. And I think that's a testament to coaching, and they're getting a lot more comfortable in the scheme that they're running. So they're starting to play a lot faster. So I think Max Bulla is really underrated in how he got, Drake Bowen was not a starter at linebacker before the season, got him ready to start at Mike linebacker. Kingston Viliamasa is a true freshman, and now he's competing at a high level. Jaden Osbury is performing well. Jack Kaiser's playing a new position. I think that he's not talked about enough, so I'm going to go underrated.
I'm just glad that we can talk about someone other than one of the lightning rod coaches. Max Bulla, I will say underrated as well. And if you would have asked me during training camp, I might have said overrated just because everyone loved him and, sat there like a Labrador every time he said anything, just because of how fast he talked, and he would throw in a few, curse words and whatever else and just get everybody fired up. He's definitely old school football. That's like Jeff says, very, very solid old school dude. And, just everything you said, the way he's got these young guys to play, because, again, like anytime we've mentioned some of these players, they'll say, well, he was a 5-star guy or he was a 4-star, so it's like assumed that these guys are supposed to be able to come in. But, one, the players still have to have the aptitude to do it. And the fact that they have cross-trained these guys at different positions, and you really just have not seen much drop-off at all in that linebacker unit. And remember, this is the first time that he's been a full-time assistant coach. He was still he was still coaching them up and running the room for the most part last year, but he was still grad assistant, so this is really still year one for him. So definitely underrated for me.
Yep. 100%.
Last one, receivers coach Mike Brown. To me, this is honestly the hardest one.
I wrote down notes before the show, and I have a question mark next to his name because I
know.
I mean, if we're going to go the route that Joe Rudolph sample size is too small, I think you got to throw Mike Brown into that category as well. And that's kind of where I'm at with it, because I don't know how to rate him, if I'm just being honest. I don't want to say that he is underrated. I don't really think you can say that he's overrated either, because like those two things is like the sample size is just way too small. And you compound that with the issues of, the offensive line not giving Riley Leonard enough time in pass protection, Riley Leonard having issues with accuracy. I don't know if you can gauge how well the wide receivers have played. I will say from a blocking standpoint, the wide receivers have played really well, and it's a significant improvement from last year. With this one, I just don't know how to rate him. What do you think?
No, I completely agree with that. And, I've seen people like jury's still out, TBD, all that kind of stuff. It's like the thing about the receivers is the quarterback obviously plays a huge part in it. And when the quarterback has started pulling the trigger a little bit more in the last couple of weeks, we've definitely started to see more out of these guys. And, and when he wasn't pulling the trigger, we obviously saw times where they were open. And so we knew that they were doing, at least their part to get open, but they can't do anything if the ball's not coming their way. So I agree. Like, I think we all expected to see a heck of a lot more from this passing offense early on, but we are at least starting to see glimmers of it. And I think that we're going to get a much better chance to evaluate the entire operation over the course of the next 7 games. So yeah. I'm in the same boat. I'm at an incomplete right now for Brown. So let's move on. Man, I didn't realize that we were gonna go that long doing the overrated, underrated, properly rated. Fill in the blank. With no Notre Dame football game this Saturday, you'll be doing blank.
So I just moved apartments, and I'm going to finish setting everything up and moving all the boxes and unpacking.
I thought your backdrop looked a little different there than it looked last week when you were on. So that must be why.
Yep. We moved. We needed to get a bigger place, and the apartment complex has been pretty awesome with it. So,
yep. Well, I will not be moving. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about that. My wife actually got some new furniture last week, and so we did some rearranging and selling old furniture and stuff last week. So that sets up to be, much more just kind of free time lounging. I think I'll probably watch some college football in the afternoon. My Royals beat the Orioles in the first round of the playoffs. They finished it off, so they're going to play the Yankees. Game 1 is Saturday night. I do wish it was maybe 4:30 instead of 6:30 Saturday night, but so I'll be watching a little bit of that Saturday night. And it's this is always kind of the fun time. October is to me, it's the best sports month. You can flip around. You've got some baseball playoff games going on. Eventually, you've got the World Series, obviously, college football, NFL, and for basketball fans, basketball, the NBA is coming back as well. So watch a little college football and then some baseball playoffs Saturday night. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Well, it sounds like you were pretty bummed out that you're not moving this weekend. So if you feel like coming down to Indianapolis and moving some boxes, man,
just help out.
Let me know. We got you.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Sounds like a lot of fun. Do you buy or sell Miami as the team to beat in the ACC?
I would buy that right now. I think it's between them or Clemson. And right now I think Miami's the team to beat. Cam Ward is an electric playmaker. So yeah, I would buy that.
So we've got a hold, we've got a sell. I still like Clemson. Louisville is really the best team that both of these teams have to play the rest of the way. Miami, after they've got the Cal game Saturday night, then they've got Louisville, Florida State, Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Syracuse. So I mean, the schedule, like, for them is not hard by any stretch, but Clemson's schedule is no harder either. I think they've got Stanford coming up this weekend, and they've got pretty close to the same schedule. So really, I see them meeting in the ACC title game. And as of right now, I would probably give Clemson the edge. So I'm going to sell on Miami, and I'm going to go with old reliable Clemson to kind of find themselves back in the mix. They sort of fell off the radar after that blowout to Georgia, obviously to open up the season. But I think that they're going to be right back in the mix by the time it's all said and done. Will you stay up for the ACC After Dark matchup between Miami and Cal, 10:30 Saturday night?
Yeah, I will. I'm more of a night owl anyways.
Oh, to be young.
So yeah.
I'll and Brian, the night owls. That's like, for me, I'll be finding myself. That's probably about the time, like the baseball game will be ending. I'll probably try to see if I can stay up a little bit. What always happens with me is like, if I'm covering a Notre Dame game and then it's in that time range, whether I come home or I was here covering it or whatever, I'm always a little bit more amped up. And so I can stay up a little, like longer after that. But like 10:30 is going to be pushing it. I'm just being honest. Like, I might have to record it or something and see if I can watch some of it the next day. So I'll probably be lucky if I get in the first quarter of that game.
Sure.
Okay, final question tonight. Start, bench, cut. You told me you were a Quentin Tarantino fan, so I've got 3 Tarantino movies for you. Start, bench, cut. Jackie Brown, Inglourious Bastards, Hateful Eight.
So I'm starting Inglourious Bastards because that's one of my favorite movies of all time. Love that movie.
Okay.
I'm going to bench the Hateful Eight, and I think I'm going to cut Jackie Brown.
I've got them in that exact same order. Inglourious Bastards is one that I can watch over and over and over again. It's one of my, I'm right there with you. It's become definitely one of my favorites. Hateful Eight has been on a lot on one of the pay channels for the last month. And it's one of those that's like, I'll flip over and kind of see where they are. And then, maybe watch for 15, 20 minutes. It's a long movie though.
It is
incredible how long that movie is.
It's a long movie. I'm a sucker for like Westerns and stuff. So I mean, love Django Unchained, love The Hateful Eight, and there's a movie on Netflix called The Harder They Fall, which is very Quentin Tarantino-esque.
Okay.
I would check that out. It's a really good cast. Idris Elba's in it. It's a good movie. Guilty pleasure movie for sure.
Ooh, that's a bingo. Thank you very much, DK. Yeah, like the some of the lines in Inglourious Bastards, just love it.
Mm-hmm.
Jackie Brown, have you seen Jackie Brown?
So
I know you're a little bit younger, so it was
full
you'd have been really young
transparency
when it was out.
Full transparency, I have not, which is why I cut it, because like I just couldn't. I definitely wasn't going to start it over Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah, to me, it's like one of all of his movies, it's to me probably the least rewatchable of all of them, honestly. I've seen the others multiple times. I've seen Jackie Brown maybe twice, like when it came out in theaters, and then maybe, like one and a half other times. But a lot of people think that it's one of his best as well. I'm just not as up there on Jackie Brown. Well, Trevor, I think that's going to do it for tonight. We covered a lot of topics as usual, and I guess we've got ourselves a long weekend now. We don't have any IB countdown to kickoff coming up tomorrow. We've got no Notre Dame postgame show coming up over the weekend, so I think that this is going to do it. We'll be back on Monday. We've got to kind of figure out where you're going to fit in next week in terms of maybe Tuesdays. I've still got to confirm with Jesse. I was saying before, I think he's going to be able to show up for rapid fire. So it might be like a combination of you or Vince for the first half of the show and then him jumping in for the second. So we'll have to get that figured out next week.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Just let me know. Only thing I have Brian and I are doing the Friday mailbag tomorrow, and then
All
obviously
right.
there's no
Okay.
post
I
game.
forgot about that. All right. Well, Trevor, I appreciate you jumping in. Good to talk to you as always. Good luck with all your moving and unpacking and all that super fun stuff. At least it's not really hot outside. At least it's fall, so it's cooling off a little bit.
If it was hot outside, I think I just wouldn't have moved. If I'm just being 100% honest.
I've moved in July and August more times than I would ever want to admit.
Not for me.
All right. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week on IB Nation Sports Talk.